welcome back to another Comp and Coffee. Very excited again to be here in the middle of winter, the winter doldrums here in New England with Matt and Bill. Matt, are you all ready for the giant snowstorm that's coming? Do you have all your French toast supplies in place?
I think I'm ready to go. I'm supposed to catch a flight the next day to Mexico, so I really hope that it doesn't get in the way of that. And the crazy thing is it was 70 degrees yesterday.
It was, yeah. If you don't like the weather in New England, wait 5 minutes, and we're getting that.
Exactly.
Bill, are you hunkered down? Yeah, have you got your salt rock ready to go, your rock salt and all that? You good to go?
Yes, I am hunkered. I'm not really hunkered down. I'm hunkered up. But, yeah, we're ready. I need to check on that, though, now that you mention it. I'm not sure how much more rock salt we have. Last snowstorm kind of
want anybody
sucked it all
slipping on
up.
your property and suing you. That'd be bad. That'd be awkward.
Yeah, that would be bad.
So, yeah, make sure you do that. Yeah, I think we're ready, too. I am going to fly. Next week is school vacation week here in the state of New Hampshire, so got a little PTO planned myself. I want to get out before the storm traps us, so hopefully that will happen. We'll see what happens. But in other news, in addition to snowstorms, the other big news for us here at Payscale is we just launched our brand new 2022 Compensation Best Practices Report, as we like to call it, the CBPR, right? And what's exciting about this thing, and the reason we get so excited about it, and we love to share it with our clients and folks, is that it's really the longest running and arguably the most comprehensive report of its kind out there. It's been going for 13 years now. This is the 13th year. And we got a huge number of respondents, over 5,000, almost 5,500 respondents to this thing, which is way more than most of these sorts of surveys actually get. And so we thought it'd be kind of fun to go through some of the findings and the insights that many of you out there shared in the report, shared with us by completing the surveys and giving us that feedback. So we appreciate it. And we don't just kind of look at some of the results there and kind of share our thoughts as we go through this thing. So Bill and Matt, are you ready? Are you all comp moded up? Do you have your giant cups of coffee in front of you? You're ready to talk about compensation trends and findings? Are we ready here to go?
I rolled out of bed ready.
I am so ready.
All right. Let's see here. Let's go to the very beginning, sort of some of the earlier insights in the report. There's so much stuff in here. We're not going to get through this whole report. There's so much great stuff in here. If you want more details, head on over to payscale.com. The link to the report is right at the top of the screen. But one of the very first things that I think is sort of interesting here is really that, as we all know, great resignation, great rethink, whatever you want to call it, has occurred. Organizations are seeing huge amounts of labor challenges, either turnover or just hard times finding labor. And what our survey's showing initially here is that a lot of orgs, while they're also experiencing labor shortages, they're also looking directly at compensation as a way to sort of help, deal with that. So compensation is, right at the top of the list there. Matt, what's kind of your reaction to this? Any surprises in this kind of insight?
No, not terribly surprising. I think it's a good thing that people are narrowing in on compensation. I mean, if this great resignation is happening, I think the main reason that people will leave to go to another company, the main attraction for them is more money, and I think that organizations can take a look in-house, make sure that they're paying appropriately, and some other things we've talked about in the past, make sure that they're clearly articulating what the total rewards package is for their organization. So it's not terribly surprising that they're taking a keen eye to that at this point.
Yeah, Bill, what's your reaction?
I think one of the things that's important, I mean, I think it's all true, but one of the things that's important here is that we're hearing and seeing a lot that people are leaving for multiple reasons, and money is definitely one of them, but it's also like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And everyone just sort of is like, oh, it's still millennial.
Right.
First of all, millennials are older than we think they are. It's millennial Gen Z, but that kind of thinking, does work its way, in this case, up, to older workers too. It's like, why am I going to work every day? What do I want to do? And is it all about the money, or is it about the mission? Is it about the work-life balance? Is it about, the people I work with, whether I can work from home, some or all of the time, things like that. And so I think you're getting, a lot of people just sort of, as you said, Russ, like the Great Reset, or, you get a lot of people who are stepping back and saying, I want something different. Well, and it could be any of a million things that they want different, which is interesting. And then you also have this part of the population that we often kind of overlook, but it's a huge part of our population, our working population, is the, sort of the low wage hourly workers, who are definitely motivated by money and definitely looking for that higher wage. And so you have this demand and all of this, push on minimum wage around the country that's, driving people to rethink what they're doing and rethink the flexibility they want versus the flexibility their employers demand, which is what's causing, pain in sort of, restaurants and hospitality, where it's, ultimate flexibility for the employer, and scheduling challenges for the employee. And those people were forced into different roles during the peak of COVID, and now we're looking at alternatives where they can make comparable amounts of money and have a different kind of relationship with their employer and with their work and with their scheduling.
Do you think that, Bill, like, for an organization, the compensation part of this is the easiest thing to address, and that's why a lot of organizations are doing that? Sure, it's the most expensive probably to throw money at that to fix it, but in terms of like strategy and structure, to like some of the things you were talking about when you were talking about millennials and what they want to do, wanting more work-life balance, those are harder problems to solve for HR, for executives to fix that, or, fix that for a large population of their organization. Whereas with compensation, you could take a look at the market data, see where you lie with the market data, see what your competitors are paying, and then fix that issue with money.
Yes. To, paraphrase someone that no one here knows, it's just math. I mean, it's an equation that can be solved, not necessarily. And as you pointed out, Matt, you can figure out what the right numbers are somewhat easily with the right inputs, the right market data, but whether or not you have the budget to do that, and that's where the challenge comes. But all the other dimensions, the other levers that you have to work with or need to work with are harder. And the biggest challenge is it's easy to sit back and go, it's just compensation. Let's figure out like what our budget is and who we care about and most, or who we need most, and, put more money like to those people. The problem with some of these like work-life balance things is Bill, Matt, and Russ here, we all have different wants and needs. And we're just three people, and you extend that across a whole business, and you have different decision makers or different people that are interested. You have the CFO who cares about the numbers. You have the, CHRO or, VP of HR who cares about, equity and fairness among the people. You have the line managers that have their teams they want to keep connected, and, and everybody wants different things. And, Russ, note, here's the pitch for a new podcast. But the challenge that our industry has is, we would love to have this massive cafeteria plan where you can pick and choose whatever kinds of quote compensation you get, flexibility, work from home, higher pay, longer vacations, whatever it is. But then you have the pay equity people coming and saying, oh, look, the men all took higher pay and the women all took more flexibility. Now we have a gender problem. And it's like, but it was their choice. But you can't let people make it, choices against their interests. And so we have these challenges of how do you make it fair and what everybody wants, because everybody doesn't want the same thing. And so I think, that's where you get this friction. And what Matt's talking about is it's not just a spreadsheet. It's a sociology experiment.
I think that's right. But also, I think, Matt, your insight that comp might be one of the easier levers to pull is reflected in the report. So if we look at sort of the next big insight from the report here is that pay raises are higher than ever. And so what we were seeing is that it looks like, Matt, you're bang on. Like, these organizations know there's a bunch of reasons people are leaving. because you're currently understaffed, and moments ago we were just talking about like 76% of organizations are basically saying we're having labor shortages. So if you're understaffed, you've got a little extra money lying around in your budget, and so your biggest fear is trying to attract the right people, but more importantly, you can't lose any more. So since you got a little extra budget, the easiest lever to pull is comp. It's not a surprise, probably, that the other big thing the report found, or one of the other things, is that 44% of organizations are planning to give pay raises higher than 3% this year. So 3% sort of the traditional, like sort of the joke all over saying compensation, right? Oh, it's a 3% raise this year, same as last year, right? Well, this year, more organizations are doing that. In fact, if you look at the past 3 years, I thought this was sort of interesting. Back in 2020, 64% of organizations gave significant pay increases or planning to increase pay. In 2021, it was 85%. And now in 2022, we have 92% organizations planning to do significant pay increases. So really, when you're thinking about it that way, it's not a surprise that this is where everybody's going, but it seems like it's the answer most organizations are looking at, because to your point, Bill, all these other options, everything else is hard to figure out what people wants more, but money always talks, right? Everybody would like some amount of money. And so that seems to be the answer. I don't know that this is a surprise, but I guess it's good to see the organizations really are looking compensation straight in the eye now and saying, this is something we need to start looking at more aggressively. What's your guys' reaction to that?
I think that's true, but I would also, caution people that, when you look at year-over-year numbers, you got to remember what was going on in the previous or upcoming years, right. And 64% of companies giving pay increases in 2020. That was at the same time they were having layoffs and furloughs and things, and so instead of a raise, we're giving you a continued employment. That was what was going on there. So that's a low year. And so it's not super surprising that the numbers go up, because now you've got to catch up for what was last time. And we have more inflation now, significantly more inflation. So of course we're going to see higher numbers, rate to quantify it. Is it going to stay up that high forever? Probably not. It'll, sort of regress back to normal over the next few years, but we don't know when.
Yep. And I do think too, and this might go back to Matt's point earlier too, that this is the easy thing to do. I do wonder if we're going to overcompensate. We might overpay now, both due to inflation or just as a knee-jerk reaction to keep people at any cost. And then at some point, we're going to have to sort of correct back. And that's going to put more dependency on comp professionals to kind of figure out, well, what is, is this going to lead us to a place where I've got skills more carefully, and what is the right pay for the right work? And and so right now we're sort of in this sort of overcorrect from 2020. Now we're overcorrecting post 2020, and then we've got to recorrect. It's almost like the market, right? We've got to kind of recorrect now once all this is behind us. So we'll see what happens. Matt, any other insights on that? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, then there are going to be difficult conversations that happen because, people do not expect to make less in an increase than they did in previous years, especially if performance is at par or greater. So if we're overcompensating this year for the last 2 years when we weren't able to do increases, the expectation from an employee standpoint will be that that will continue. And, we understand that can't continue at that same rate over the next few years. So you're going to have to sort of wean off of it, would be my guess, and have more transparent conversations about sort of what's happened over the last few years and why we're, sort of making up for lost time.
Yep.
Agreed.
One of the things, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, to avoid hate mail, I just want to keep putting the footnote on that. Compensation is the easiest one to figure out. It's not necessarily the easiest one to fix. That's a budget issue. I don't want listeners banging on the dashboard. These guys are idiots. It's no,
I can't afford this. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's a challenge, and that's the hard part.
And we talk about this all the time with clients, right? A lot of times the boss will say, well, the rising cost of entry level labor, we just need people on the floor, hire them at any price. And then you have all kinds of compression issues, right? Now you got to fix, right? And where do you find the budget for that? So
chain reaction.
Exactly. So willy-nilly, sort of responses to these sorts of pressures on the business by just pulling the compensation lever can cause all kinds of problems downstream. And one of the things, and I think people are starting to anticipate this, so there's a couple of findings in the report that I was really gratified to see. One of them was around pay equity. So this is really interesting. A lot of organizations responded that they're really going to take some significant steps this year as for a proactive pay equity strategy. And actually, in the first time in the history of the report, the majority of folks surveyed actually said they were somewhere in the proactive step of pay equity, activities, which is fantastic because prior to this, in the past 13 years, it's always been a minority of companies that really thought pay equity was important. Now it's the majority, and that's one of the areas you really got to keep a close eye on, because if you're pulling that compensation lever, you got to make sure you're still being equitable, right? Bill, you mentioned this earlier, right? You got to really think about the bigger picture when you're making some of these sorts of things, and you have to be very careful when you're looking at non-cash comp opportunities. Is it being balanced fairly for everyone's lifestyle, everyone's protected groups, and are we all treating everyone equally? And that's something we got to keep at the forefront. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is true. I mean, I think, it's a combination of events, a confluence of things all coming together, making this, sort of top of mind. And it is one of those things that it sort of snowballs, tying into the lead-in conversation. It snowballs as like the more companies that talk about it, the more media that talks about it, the more like other companies have to talk about it. It's like you can't ignore what everyone else is doing, otherwise you become a laggard. And so it's good and not particularly surprising, but it's good that we're starting to see this, and that companies are starting to really focus on pay equity and fairness across their organizations, and we'll see it growing and putting more focus on it and putting more, I guess, weight behind it. I think, and another thing is that just so that people listening understand, it's like, Russ is working his way through a list of key discoveries. So this is one of the discoveries. This isn't a random divergence from our conversation about pay.
I thought I did a pretty good job in this segue there, Bill. And you're like behind the curtain.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks. Well, just want to make sure people are following along.
Nice. And this is also interesting. Now, this is harder to segue into, but I think it's really important. One of the things that actually surprised me was the next sort of observation, which is that very little movement has happened on the pay transparency topic. So while the majority of organizations surveyed are looking aggressively at pay equity, there's really no change in terms of sort of how organizations think about their initiatives on pay transparency. They were much more sort of like, same as last time, which is surprising to me because I'm not sure, in my mind, pay transparency and pay equity are not decoupled. I kind of feel like you need to get some amount of both to have either. And so it's surprising to me that people aren't thinking about those things more holistically. And maybe they are, and they're just not thinking about it that way on the survey. But I don't know, what's your guys' reaction to that? Am I wacky to consider these two things linked together? Or are they really separate when people think about how to tackle them? What are your thoughts?
I think they're linked together. I think it is somewhat surprising, the results that we saw, and the lack of progress has been made on pay transparency, companies, thinking on it, working about it. But, to be fair to organizations, it's opening up pay transparency is a big undertaking, as is addressing pay equity. So it's great that people are planning it. The proof will be in the pudding that they take action there. There's a lot of work that needs to go into that, obviously. But with pay transparency, you need to have all hands on board, all managers, directors, executives being able to talk to this, because once you open up the curtain, as we just did and how we're working through a presentation
right.
today, you need to have the talk track down for everyone, that everyone's educated about the pay transparency, educated on compensation and how it all works. And I think all of us, the three of us, and probably everyone that's listening to this podcast knows that, explaining compensation is it's not an easy thing, and it takes some work, and it's not something that people just naturally know about unless they're in our industry.
It's all true. I think, but I also would say is like, we're on this spectrum of, clear to ambiguous to vague to ill-defined, and, we're talking about like compensation was the easiest problem to address is because, it's, there's a lot of data, the concepts are cleanly, narrowly defined. Everyone understands what base pay is and what bonuses are and things like that. When you talk about pay transparency, not well defined and not universally understood. And any two people listening here will have in their mind a different definition of what that means. And so when you do that and you start, asking people where they are on their, pay transparency journey, how they feel about pay transparency, it's like you get sort of, messy data. But, I think, apologies because, we've all seen and are looking at this, at the report, the CBPR, but, and suggest everyone else out there, get a copy. But it is trending, and these things don't, it's hard to change, sort of the way you do things quickly, and so like a move to transparency is not like, it's not like, okay, well, March 1st is coming. Let's be transparent starting in April.
Well, what's funny, Bill, is that, but what's funny about that is March 1st is coming and you got to be transparent. So here's the funny part. So the very next observation is something that actually happened to everybody in Colorado last January 1, right? And it's about to happen in New York also, which is these states are passing laws that are saying you must put salary ranges on all your job postings. So now you have transparency, right, on new hires.
Right. But back to the definition is like, that's one form of transparency or, one level of transparency. It's giving you the numbers, but it's not giving you the whys or the wheres or the who's or the hows. It's just saying this job is what we, And so
as soon as you go there, right, as soon as there's numbers published, now you've got to be able to have the rest of the conversation. And that's why I think this is something that people are going to be, in many cases, dragged kicking and screaming into. but we have a situation now where legislative change is going to drive a lot of organization. And we talked about this last year when this happened in Colorado.
Yes.
We said, well, gee, if you have employees in Colorado, you're going to have to start doing this. Well, now it's happening in New York, and most multinational companies have offices in New York. So now you've got a situation where pretty much every major employer is going to be under the gun to do something about this from a new job posting listing point of view. But that now all your incumbent employees are going to be like, wait a minute, well, if the new hires are all making X, where do I fit? And so what we're seeing in the report is that, a lot of organizations, 68% of organizations are actually starting to share pay ranges with employees on a regular basis, right? And I think we're going to see more of that. But how does that tie into the definition of, to your point, Bill, of pay transparency? Is that true pay transparency? Well, not really. But it's a start, right? And I think organizations have to start to get their arms around that.
It's definitely a component of pay transparency.
Yeah.
In pretty much any reasonable definition, I would think. I mean, but one of the other things that came up in the Colorado, when we were talking about Colorado a year ago, or whatever it was, is that there were one or more, relatively big tech companies that just stopped hiring in Colorado because they weren't sure what to do about this, which again, that's sort of unintended consequences of a law. I don't know, where that stands, how long that lasted, if they ever actually enacted it. I remember, I can't even remember the name of the company, but it's one we all know. I do remember that. And it's hard to do that. And the more these laws come into play, the more we'll see companies, having to react, like you're saying, Russ, and having to do it. But every good intentioned law has, some sort of workaround kind of thing. Pay between $50,000 and $500,000.
Well, I agree. Well, what gets me excited about all this though is we do need to react to all these things. And my favorite sort of finding in the report, I'm so gratified to see this because, Bill, as you, Matt, and I have been sort of evangelizing the need for organizations to build and get into a compensation strategy, right? It can't just be a back office function. And in the report, and I think it's a combination of everything we just talked about, right? The people are pulling the lever on compensation is one of the only things they can think of to stem the hurt of retention and hiring challenges. And we got equity breathing down our necks. We got pay transparency we got to deal with. We need a compensation strategy. And one of the findings was that more and more organizations are recognizing this need for a comp strategy. And 86% of the organizations that were surveyed said they had a compensation strategy or were building one, which is up 10% year over year and 16% over prior years as well. So it's really, for me, it's exciting and gratifying to see more and more organizations getting excited about this. And I think it's really important that we as practitioners and evangelists of compensation and the importance of understanding proper compensation practices get excited about organizations thinking about that. Well, what's your guys' reaction to this? Am I too rose-colored glasses on this one, or is this a good sign?
No, I mean, a 10% increase from last year is substantial. We're not going up just a couple percent here. And I think you're right, Russ. It's all of the things we've talked about already. On top of that, you have employees coming to you asking, what is the organization doing for pay transparency? You have people, when you're interviewing them, asking what the organization does to make sure that you're paying fairly and equally throughout the organization. It's not just people coming to their manager and saying, hey, I think I should be making more money this year. I would like to make X amount. It's, what are you doing? How are you strategizing to fix potential issues that are at the organization? So it's a bigger picture thing, even coming from employees.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, when people are looking at the report, you'll see, I think that it's, what we're hearing from clients, from the 5,500 or so clients 5,500 or so companies that participated in this survey this year, it's like, they're definitely moving forward on pay transparency, fairly significantly, actually, for like the difference between where they are, where they were at the beginning of the year and where they want to be at the end of the year. There's a lot of people moving up the rank. There's a 5-point scale here, and people's goals is, companies' goals is to definitely be moving up significantly. So I think it's a good sign. You don't want to, I don't want to criticize people who are making progress for not making enough progress fast enough. You want to encourage the progress they're making and help them make it, continue making progress.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so as you think about how you do a comp strategy, stick with me here, Bill. I'm working on a good segue here for this. As you think about how you do a good comp strategy, you have to think about what things are you going to watch for and track, right, as you evaluate compensation. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was, as part of the survey, we did sort of ask this question: do you have the data or the tools needed to understand and determine compensation for, competitive skills? And so one of the things a lot of folks said we don't really know, or only 40% of folks said yes. And when we asked, what's the biggest thing factored into pay increases? You had performance, you had market adjustments, you had pay equity, but then after that, the fourth most important thing was skills. And so I think skills and skills evaluation, and we talked before on the show, right? We just did an episode not too long ago on pay for skills. I think there's that focus is going to increase. And I think the other thing we mentioned too in that episode, but I think it probably bears repeating, is we saw a lot during 2020 and 2021. We saw a lot of people depart into adjacent industries, right, into different job titles.
Yes.
Because they had the skills for that role. And so you need to understand your skills and how the skills are being paid in adjacent industries to really protect your talent. What do you think of that, Bill?
Oh, I think it's absolutely true. And I think, the strong HR people, the strong line managers are well aware of that issue, is that that our employees are trained to do a bunch of things, to use a bunch of skills, and those skills are what's valuable, not their job title. I mean, job title is also valuable, but when we're recruiting, we're looking for people that can help solve certain problems, and work in certain environments. And so, that adjacency, it's never been easier to make those kind of lateral and upward moves, because you can leverage the sum of your skills, sort of like the gestalt of your skills, and that's worth more than the job as a whole. And so I think employees are noticing it and employers are noticing it, and the world of compensation, the world of recruiting, the world of HR is changing and looking at sort of the collection of skills that are needed to form a job, to perform a job.
Yep.
Should we plug our recent episode in case anyone has listened when we talked about?
Yeah. Do you remember which one that was, Matt? Go ahead, plug it. Yeah. Plug it.
I don't know what number it was. Episode 87.
Are you making
one of my
that up?
skills? It's not one of my skills. Sorry.
I think he's making that up.
We're going to lower your pay, then, Matt.
Oh no! Never mind.
It's in the title. So I believe we said it was like guacamole. So just scroll through for the guacamole link and you'll be fine.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I tell you, look what happened with guacamole.
Exactly. It's hot right now.
It's 68. Episode 68.
Thank you, Bill. So one of the things that also was sort of interesting, and this is something that we've talked with our clients for a long time about too, is this idea that, should we stick with our tried and true data sources as we look for things like, well, how do we adjust for skills? How do we keep track of the changing, market prices? And we saw in the last insight also that the second biggest reason for pay adjustment was market data. So market data is really important. And of course, the big lesson, this doesn't surprise anyone really, but the big lesson of 2020 and 21 was, hey, things are changing so fast that you might need some additional types of data. And one of the things we had a finding on was that, yes, indeed, many folks would like to look for new types of data in addition to their favorite types. This doesn't surprise us at all. It's one of the reasons we do what we do. But it's gratifying to see that folks know they need, it's not that they're going to, not use their old data sources. Those are valuable too, but it's definitely worth having a couple data sources in your stable of options that are a little more timely, and so that you can make sure you keep up with those changes in the environment, try to get a little more proactive to see what's happening. Matt, does that surprise you at all to see that? I'm kind of excited, but what's your feelings on that?
Yeah, I'm excited, mildly surprised, pleasantly surprised, I guess would be the right way to describe it. I think we've been seeing a lot more of that since COVID hit as well, and people taking a look at new types of data sources to be able to keep up with changes in the market, new positions, all of that sort of stuff. So that's why I would expect that none of us are completely surprised here, but it's great to see, and great to see that in the survey, we're seeing the data validate that people are interested in new sources.
Yeah. And so far, most of the things in the report, I think, weren't really counterintuitive, right? I think most of the things we've talked about so far, it's nice to have. And one of the things I think that's nice about this report, right, is you can take it to your leadership team, you can take it internally and kind of justify and argue for some of maybe the budget you need for whatever you're doing around your comp strategy or building out a comp strategy, growing your comp team, whatever. But a couple things in here were counterintuitive, and I'm kind of curious. The areas where I thought, it's different than what I'm hearing from talking to clients directly, and I don't know if it's because of how the questions were asked, or maybe it's just a reality of the situation. Most offices, we asked a couple questions around remote work and geo differentials, right? Like, are you adjusting for geo differentials still? And, how is remote work really changing? And 74% of organizations said that remote work was not one of the driving factors for their comp strategy or their structures. In other words, essentially remote work didn't change how they think about those sorts of things. I thought that was interesting, especially since many of the organizations I've spoken with have specifically said we're thinking of moving away from geodis because, reasons. People are moving, we have people all over the place now, and it's harder for pay equity to do it that way. And so we're thinking more about going to maybe a national average with a few premium geographies for special cases. I don't know, what's your guys' reaction to that? Maybe it's just those are a very small percentage of the companies and most organizations are sticking with the tried and true methods. Were you surprised by this at all, Bill?
Bill was muted. Sorry. I am surprised by it. I think I think I have to guess that the challenge here is another one of the sort of clarity of the question and clarity of the answerer. And like, what does all this mean? And I don't think people have quite figured out what to do about remote work. And again, like, how is it defined? And, is remote work always, like full-time remote, hybrid, part-time remote? Is it remote? There's a lot of, particularly, younger workers that are, just, picking up and, moving from the Northeast to Miami, say, or, people going to Texas, or, people leaving California and going to Nevada or Colorado. It's like people are just moving around to places where they want to live because they're, you can Zoom from anywhere. And I don't think we've fully understood what that means and how we're gonna respond to it. And so I'm not sure anybody's quite figured this out, like what they're doing and how they're doing it. I'm definitely hearing more along the lines of people, HR people saying, there's not the idea of geo differentials may be going away, and that, we're just going to have more, universal pay or at least national pay versus, higher rates in, the more expensive cities, and economists will tell you, if you raise, if you let all your employees, these sort of big tech companies, big New York banks let people work from anywhere in the country, that basically means that all those remote places or all those more attractive, sunny weather places, ski weather places are now going to have higher wages, which is going to drive prices up, which is going to make them, more expensive to live in. It's going to raise the housing costs. It's going to raise, the general cost of living, which is then going to raise the geo differentials. So it remains to be seen, like, how it all settles out. I don't know. I don't know how to predict this.
Well, I think that over the last few years, there've been so many times where people think that we're going to be opening up offices and moving from
true.
Some remote. I get back to like a year, maybe a year and a half ago, us doing a podcast about the return to work, and man, we were a little ahead of our time there. And
we were way ahead of our time with that, Matt.
No. We just released it early.
That's true. If we go on vacation, we'll play that as one of the greatest hits, and then it'll be timely at that point. Because people, every time you look to reopen up offices, there's another outbreak within the last few years, and I think that companies are just hesitant to put a new policy in place to figure out what they want to do here until we are really through everything. So,
right. Well, and now it's. Yeah, I mean, now it's been 2 years, so a decent percentage of corporate leases have come due, and companies have had to make decisions about what to do with their office space. And let us not forget, not everybody works in an office. Some people work in warehouses, some people work in manufacturing plants, and hotels and restaurants, and those places have their geographic challenges, but you can't. It's not easy to move the location of a hotel or, a warehouse, and you need critical mass of people so that, those people are not going remote.
Yeah, that's right. So I think they're still I'm going to read these as they're still figuring it out. I don't know, but it's interesting because I thought people were getting a little more aggressive on that. But the last thing, which I think is sort of interesting, and maybe it is kind of the best way to summarize it, one of the questions, and you could kind of look this thing as the glass is half full or the glass is half empty, but about 53% of organizations, about half, said that they are confident or very confident in the ability of their current compensation packages to attract and retain talent. So I look at that as sort of like, well, so half of everybody out there feels like they're doing a good job, and then the other half feels like they got to make a change, which probably explains why so many folks are looking aggressively at comp strategy. But yeah, so I think it's good that people know they need to do that. But what's your reaction to that, Matt? Is that surprising to you that half the organizations, are you half full or half empty in this one, Matt? How are you interpreting that?
I'm always a half full sort of guy here. So, it's not completely surprising. I think that, one of the earlier results that we saw from the study, that we saw that many organizations, I'm trying to think back to what it was, maybe 85%, somewhere in that ballpark, agree or strongly agree that workplace flexibility is the key driver now. So, they feel like that is the more important thing to employees today, and having flexibility, having work-life balance. So that then in turn makes them more confident that the compensation side of things is in 53% feel like it's in a good place, and they need to focus on, the work-life balance, the flexibility, that sort of stuff. I don't know if I'm off there, but sort of how I was looking at it.
Bill, what do you think?
I think it's, I don't know what to think about this one. It's sometimes, cynical side of me is like, well, the people that think that it's, that it's working, it's not, and the ones that think it's not are just overconcerned, and it is.
Somewhere in the middle.
I mean, there is always some of that, but I think it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning or earlier, that compensation is a big component, but it's not the only component. And I think that's the one that's, sort of the clearest to control. And that, companies that are hiring can't afford to not hire, to not bring people in. And so they have to, it's almost like you have to make it work. There's downstream ramifications of making it work, which, Matt mentioned, some, earlier in the call or in the podcast here, it's that, we can put in a comp philosophy that allows us to hire new, good people, but could cause the existing people to go, wait, why is the new guy getting all that money? What about me?
Right.
And so then the retention part, so you have to do that. And so now, it's a little, back to, our favorite metaphor, it's a little whack-a-mole. It's like trying to keep up with the pay raises. And so I think that, again, companies are doing what they have to do to get the job done right now and trying to figure out how to standardize, make things reasonable and fair, go from reactive mode to proactive mode. And I think that's where there's going to be a little bit of push and pull, a little friction to try and figure out how to make a standardized approach, how to, come up with your philosophy and your guidelines and then use them to make sure that everybody's being paid fairly, adequately, and in a way that you're not aggressively overpaying, and that you're not at that line where all of a sudden everybody's going to go, you know what, I could do better across the street or across the country. I can work remotely for, some other company that's willing to pay me more and give me more autonomy, more flexibility, more of what I want from my relationship with my employer. So,
yep. I think that's right. And there you have it. There it is, folks. That's our thoughts, for what they're worth, on the CBPR. But what do you think? If you've downloaded it and taken a look at it, and you have your own thoughts, did we pick out the most salient points that you saw? Were there other observations you had? Let us know. Send an email with your thoughts in it to coffee@payscale.com, or just tweet it to us over at Payscale on Twitter.
And
if you're listening to Cop and Coffee. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, and if people just want to get a copy of the report, they can go to the Payscale website, payscale.com, and it's right at the top of the page. There's a link, so you can see what it is we were talking about.
Exactly. Right there at the very top. You can't miss it. So thanks for listening to Cop and Coffee.
Comp and Coffee is a PayFactors production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payfactors.com, tweet us at PayFactors, or share your thoughts in our PayFactors community tile. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.